Hi, welcome to Clickteam Fusion 2.5 for beginners. This is episode 2. I hope you enjoyed episode 1. In all of these tutorials, what we're going to do is try and build an application or a game, and I'm going to show you every single step. Now, some people plan it all in advance and have things ready. I'm not going to have anything ready. No graphics. I don't even know how I'm going to achieve each goal, and you'll be there seeing the struggle and seeing how I find solutions. So some of the stuff I do might not be the right way, and also it might not be the best way. You might think, oh, hang on, maybe I try to do it this way and this will be better. So that's fine, and that's the beauty of Clickteam Fusion, is there's always different ways of getting to the same goal, and some are better than others, and some you do, and then about halfway down the line you look back and go, why did I do it that way? It's made it much more difficult for me now. So, in this episode we're going to create just a simple bat and ball game. It's going to be using actives, and actives are the big thing today. As I said in episode 1, actives you'll probably use more than anything else, any other object. And we're going to look at how we create actions and how we have a simple user interface, how we set up the keyboard to move things, how we create, well, we can go for it now. So for this we need the user to control the paddle at the bottom, which is just a block going left to right. One of the problems with that is you don't want them to go off the screen. You want it to program it to stop them from going off the screen, so when they hit it, it stops. But you also want them to be able to go back the other way from the screen. You want the ball to bounce randomly, so we're going to create a ball that just bounces around the screen randomly. The aim is to hit and destroy all the blocks at the top, so there's going to be a row of blocks at the top, and the aim of it is to bounce against them and destroy it. Now, if we've got time, we might look at different ways to create the blocks rather than copy and pasting them, and we might also discover ways to have blocks that don't get destroyed on the first hit. Those are quite advanced topics, but if we've got time, we'll look at improving the game to that point. The player loses if the ball hits the bottom, so you need an action to say, right, when the ball hits the bottom of the screen, because the guy didn't, or the person didn't have his paddle there in time, that's the game over. And again, you can create lives. You could say that the player loses a life. There's a lot of things you can do to this game. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm just going to start up Clickteam Fusion from the start. File, new, because it's a new project. And it automatically assumes that the resolution for all of these, I'll show you here, the resolution will be 640 across, that's pixels across, and 480 up. But you can change that. It'll also assume that you want to want to create a Windows exe application, which you normally do anyway to test the game or application. But as you can see here, I've got Flash, iOS, and HTML5, and there's also Android and a few other exporters that you could choose. But we'll stick to Windows exe for tutorials, definitely, because with the other ones there's an added level of complexity after you've created it. With exe, you just created this. It's the native way of, that this program works, that Clickteam works, is for exes, but it does a really good job exporting them to other things. So to get our first level open, I'm just going to double click the first level. You can see here we've just got one level, but I could create more, but I just want one for this. So I double click on that. This is my stage, and actually you can run the game now. If you go to run, and then application. Now you can see there's application or frame. Frame is level, so if I had 10 levels and I just wanted to play that level I was in, I'd click frame. Because there's only one level, it doesn't matter which one you pick, so I'm with application's fine. And you can see here there's the square there, or rectangle there, that's on the screen, and it's in its own window, and I've managed to minimize Clickteam Fusion. It's in its own window. Oh wow, didn't know it minimises when you wiggle windows. Anyway, this panel here is a debugger. It allows you to access, if I click the plus, allows you to access all the information in the game's global values and you can add objects there to have a look at, and that's a later topic. The only one I use on this bar here is the stop, and that just closes the application. Sometimes I get rid of this X here and get rid of the menu here, and the only way to stop the game, unless I program something differently, is with this stop button here. So I'm going to click that stop button now. It'll just stop the application from running. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is create the paddle for the player. Now there's different ways of doing this. I could say insert new object in the menu. I don't ever use that, and I think there's probably a menu item somewhere here that allows you to create new items. I double click. I find a spare bit of the storyboard, which is everywhere at the moment because we've got nothing on it, and just double click, and that opens this menu here. Now it always opens to all objects. Let's just expand this a little bit. It always opens to all objects, but if you know what you're looking for, say if I'm looking for a text object, you can go to text and it will show you just the text objects. You can also, say if I'm looking for string object, you can also search here, and as you type it will filter them down. Now you might think, oh hang on, I've typed in string and list has come up and search has come up. Within each object there's a little keyword list or a little sentence that would have the word string in for a list item. It's designed to try and help you identify other objects. It might not have string in it, but if you're interested in strings you might want that. The one we're going to be using mostly today is the active. Now active, and I'm just going to double click that and click it onto the storyboard. An active is a thing in the game. It's a thing that you want something that you want to control, that you want to you want the player to control, or you want to programmatically control. You want it to have an influence in the game. The alternatives are background things, which just sit there and look pretty, but they don't interact with anything. Anytime you want something to interact with something, you pick an active. So we've put our active down. Now all actives by default are created with this sort of diamond shape, sort of a square on its side. That's designed so that you've got something to click on. That actually, if I wanted to create something else, but I wanted to create that active first, then I can click on it. If it had nothing on it, it would just be blank, and I wouldn't know where it was. I wouldn't be able to click on it. Something I like to change straight away is the name. If you don't change the name, Clickteam's absolutely fine with that, but it will call things active, and then the next one is active 2, active 3, active 4. It's going to be really hard to find out which one your active is when we look at the programming later. And I use the word programming, it's just as a really simple process, so don't get too scared. But it's really easy to identify if you use a proper name, so I'm going to click on that. Now I always start my naming with lowercase, and then if I want extra words I use uppercase. Clickteam doesn't mind spaces, but from a programming point of view I never like putting spaces in, so that's probably my hang up. So now this is padding. I'm thinking so I created a website earlier, so I want paddle rather than padding. Okay, so that's called paddle, which is the paddle at the bottom that the player will control. And you can see here in this window here, which shows you all the objects that are in the level, it says paddle, and actually this now is referred to as a paddle. It won't be referred to as an active anymore. The good thing just on that point is that when you change the name, it updates it everywhere. Everywhere that it did say paddle, say if I wanted to call it player control or something like that, if I updated it, it would find all the references to paddle and it would change it to player control, which is a really, really good thing, because sometimes with programming you've got to sit there and find each one, which is a real pain. So now you might think, well, we don't want a diamond. Well, no, we don't. So what we're going to do is double click on it, if I can get that right, and it opens this window here. Now this window is purely for you to create graphics and animations. So let's have a look. What I like to do first is enlarge it so that I know what I'm looking at. Let's enlarge it there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the selection tool and drag it like this. A different way you can do that is if you hold Control and A, and that's a shortcut for all, and that highlights everything. And then I'm just going to click delete because we don't want that. Now if I was to close it now with the OK, it would have a problem because there's nothing on the screen, so there's no way of me getting to the active again. So all I'm going to do now is click this one, the fill tool, which and if you've used Paint or Photoshop, you'll know what that is. It just fills everything in, all the space in, and it fills it in up to a line, so it won't go beyond a line. So I'm just going to click that, and I'm going to click OK. Now, the reason I've clicked OK and I haven't done anything further is I find it much easier to size objects actually on the level themselves. So I can now size that, and it's automatically giving me the little sizing things. If it didn't, I'm just going to click away. Then if I click on it once, wait a second, and then click on it again, I can get that up. Be careful not to click too quickly, otherwise it will just open the graphics editor again. And I'm just going to stretch that out to try and, well, that looks about right. I think that's a bit generous. Let's make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to double click that again. Now a different way I could have done that is clicked on this one. This one here resizes it, and so if I wanted the width maybe, I don't know, 120, maybe I think I was a bit too generous before, and I want the height maybe 25, don't want it any higher than that. Now these ones here are about what's going to happen to the graphic. Proportional, if I click that, it would make sure that the width and the height were in the same ratio before. The stretch means that the object's going to be compressed or expand depending on whether you're making it bigger or smaller. If you aren't going to make it proportional, mostly you don't want to stretch it, otherwise it will compress it or make it look weird. If you want to stretch it, normally you click proportional, which is why the two are next to each other. And the resampling is all about anti-aliasing, which you don't need to know about too much, but at this point. But try it with and try it without, and you can always use the undo button if you don't like it. And I'm going to click apply, and be careful to make sure you click apply, otherwise it won't do it. It doesn't do it automatically. Now that it's slightly bigger, I'm just going to zoom out. Okay, now I'm not going to do a brilliant job at this, but I want to do some stripes. So I'm going to click the line tool. I'm going to click red. Now I want the size of the line to be a bit bigger so that I can see it, and I'm just going to do some stripes across. It's not going to be the most inspiring artwork that I've ever done. And click the fill tool again, and you'll see when I click it now here, it'll only fill that bit in. There we are. And I click these ones yellow, and why not make these blue? As I said, it's not the most inspiring design. Now you might think, well, what's all this other business? What's all this other stuff on the screen? These ones are directions. Now these are when you've got a player that when he moves right, he should look like he's on his right, at the right hand side. I don't know if that's right, but look like this. And then when he goes straight on, he should look like this. Oh, and when he goes left, I won't break stuff, he goes like this. And when he goes behind, you get the idea. I don't need to do the behind. But it allows you to have different animations and different graphics depending on which way around the player is. Now, the paddle doesn't have directions. It doesn't look any different when it's going left and right. So there's no point in me doing it. And actually, if only one of them exists, it will only take that one, and that's absolutely fine. These ones here are different animations. Now, you can create a player that walks around, and these animations are to do with that. It's to do with platformers mainly. So when he's walking, he does a little walking animation. When he's running, he does a running animation, which is maybe slightly quicker. Jumping, whenever the player presses the jump, it automatically shows the jumping animation, which is his ants coming up and then landing, etc, etc. Okay, but for a paddle, don't need any of that. Okay, just instantly on the directions, a lot of people think, oh, directions, if it's moving right, it has to look like that. If it's moving up, they're only useful for players and characters. Actually, they're much more useful than that. I use them in a lot of other things and nothing to do with the player. For instance, if you've got a button on your screen, but you want the button to look a certain way when the mouse is over it, and a certain way when you click on it, you have that button as an active, and you put a little bit of code in saying whenever the mouse is over the button, make it look up, face the direction of up, and whenever the player clicks on it, make it look left. And you can show the button slightly differently depending on the direction. So a normal button could be green, and then the mouse over it could be red. So these aren't just for player directions. And if you've got a lot of directions for the player, or you've got a lot of animations you want to be able to do, you can increase the directions with this toggle here. But we'll probably do that in a later video in a lot more detail. So I'm going to click OK, and there's my paddle there. Now let's have a look what's happening next. Okay, so I'm going to create another active, and this time I'm going to do the blocks at the top. So I'm going to click Control and A and delete. I'm going to fill them in with, it doesn't matter, I'll do it black again for now. And I'm going to try and work out what sort of size I want. Now, I normally get a piece of paper out and work this out mathematically because I know the width of the screen and I know how many will fit. I'm not going to do that for this, but that's what I would normally do. Okay. Now, we go on to a different point here. When I right click on that, you can see that there's two different ways of copy and pasting that object. There's clone object and there's duplicate object. The two are incredibly different. With cloning, you're copying the object, but you're making two separate objects. So if I show you clone object, ignore that other screen, we'll talk about that in a second, you can see that's active, and now that's active too. So those are two completely different objects. They have nothing in common now. So if I change this one won't change at all. In fact, let's do that here. So I'm going to change the colour of that to blue. Oh, click the OK instead. And that one hasn't changed. So they're different now. I'm going to click delete. But if I duplicate and I change this to blue, you can see this one's changed to blue as well. So when you clone, you're creating a brand new object, brand new active. When you duplicate, you're copying that same one. Now the computer, not to get into too much detail, but the computer has a bit of memory attached to that active. And all it does when you create two of them, when you duplicate them, is it uses the same part of its memory but just does it twice. When you clone it, it creates two parts of its memory, one for each one. That's really important because if you want those blocks to have different actions, then you might find it necessary to clone them. In general, the game or application will go a lot quicker if you duplicate. So if you can duplicate, if you can use the same one, it's always better. And there's ways of duplicating in the code, which we'll talk about maybe if we've got time, where you can actually have the same thing have different different numbers attached to it, so you can have them have different actions. But we'll go into more detail on that. The important thing is that if you duplicate and then you change one, it will change them all. So let's name this first before we copy it. So this is going to be block, and I've put a capital, I don't know why. Okay, now if I right click and click duplicate, which I want to because they're blocks, they all have the same action, you have this screen here. Now mostly when I duplicate and clone objects, I just click OK, I don't even look at it. But for this purpose, it's actually maybe quite useful for us to create more than just the one. The rows tell you how many rows of duplicated objects do you want. Now at the moment it's 2. Well, you might say, well, hang on, why is it 2? Well, it includes the first one. It includes the one that we right clicked on. So that's row 1 and then that's row 2. But actually I want maybe 4. I want 4 of them. Columns, well 1. Yeah, there was only 1 column. But we want, well, we're just going to guess now. Let's have a look. So, what, 2, 3, 4. 4 might do it. Row spacing, which is the amount of pixels between each object in the row. Or sorry, between each row. I'm going to guess here, and sometimes I guess it and get it completely wrong. I'm going to say 20. And that might be way too much. And I'm going to click 20 so we have equal spacing. Now I don't plan any of this, so this could look completely wrong. Let's have a look. Actually, that's not too bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight them all. You just left click and drag, and that highlights all of them. I'm going to use my right cursor key on the keyboard just to shift them across. Now I could have used the mouse, but I find when you're using cursor keys, which are the arrows on the keyboard, it's much easier to get them exactly where you want them. With the mouse it's easy just to completely miss your target. And that's roughly in the middle. Now if I wanted to make sure that was exactly in the middle, with them all highlighted, I can right click one of them. I could say align in frame and horizontal center. Horizontal center is left to right. If I wanted it on the vertical center, so in the middle of the frame, it would be the vertical center. So horizontal center, and I don't think that changed an awful lot. But let's just move out here somewhere. If I right click now, it's not going to let me. I think my mouse has moved slightly there. So align in frame, horizontal center, you can see the difference it makes. And the aligning on Clickteam Fusion is incredibly powerful. You can decrease your workload substantially and make things look really nice very, very easily by using that technique. Okay, now that's the blocks all set up. Now at this point it's really annoying because I want them to look slightly different. Well, that's easy. Just click on one of them, like I showed you before. So if I wanted some stripes through this as well, just do the stripes now in black. As I said, this is not a graphics design course, clearly, and it updates them all. Okay. The last step is to create the ball. So I'm going to double click again, active. Double click on that. Control and A, delete. And I am going to click the ellipse tool, which ellipse is a circle that can be stretched, but you can use it to create a circle. And this is outline, so this is, if I do this now, it's just the outline of circle, which I don't want. So I'm going to click Control and Z to undo that. This is, say if I have a different colour on my right hand click, so I right clicked on the purple there, and it creates the right clicked colour inside and the left clicked colour as the outline, which I don't want. And this filled one just takes the left clicked colour. Now it's quite difficult to get it exactly a circle, and you have to sit there and count the pixels. I'm just going to let go. What you can do is, whilst you're click and dragging it, if you press shift, so hold shift, it'll automatically make sure it's a circle. Now it doesn't always get it perfect because of the amount of pixels. It physically can't make it a circle, and that's the difference between a scalar and a vector graphic. Scalar graphics have to conform to pixels, yet vector can be as big or small as you like, but I'm not going to go into the difference in this tutorial. All you need to know is that it tries to make a circle with the little blocks, and each block there is a pixel, which means you can't get any smaller than that. So I'm going to click OK. Now looking at that, I could do with making it bigger. So if I resize it here, and I'm going to click all of these, and I want it to be about 60 is too big, so 50. I'm going to click apply, and then OK. and that looks a bit better, maybe a bit more manageable. So the stage is set now. I might want this to be in the middle, so I'm going to right click on it and align in frame horizontal center, and I might want this to start in the middle, horizontal center, so it looks a bit neater, but you don't need to do that. Okay, so what's happening now? Now if I run this, this is what it would look like if Clickteam Fusion was just the level editor. Nothing happens. You need to create actions for it to be a game, otherwise it's just a pretty picture now. So let's close that down. Now there are some actions, in fact quite a few actions, you can control within this screen. So if I click on this and I go to the movement tab at the top left and make sure you have this selected, then what I can do is I can say, well, I want this to be a bouncing ball. And you can try the movement first before you start, and that looks about right. Now you can see an obvious problem there, that there's no programming that says when it hits the side it bounces, but we can deal with that in a second. And there's other things you can control about it as well. You can make it slower or quicker. This one here is probably what we want to keep an eye on, the randomizer. One of the problems with a bouncing ball is that if it starts up, then all it's ever going to do is hit the top and bounce down again. Hit the bottom, then bounce up again. It's just going to continue going up and down and up and down. There's nothing really that you can do to change that. Depending on it hitting the bat, the side of the bat, which might influence its, or which will influence its direction, you don't want the bouncing ball to look too boring. Looking at the amount of directions it has quite a few directions, and it actually has the maximum you can have in Clickteam Fusion. So there's a lot of opportunity there for it to look more like a bouncing ball. You need to have some number in the randomizer for it to make sure it doesn't get in an endless loop. And even if it does get in an endless loop, it'll eventually get out of it. So 20, well, that looks fine for now, but we might want to change that. And the security also has an influence. Number of angles 32, as you can see, that's the maximum we've got in there. Okay, so that's that sorted. We also want the player to control that, so yet again we go to the movement tab, having clicked on this, so we've got this clicked, and I'm going to go down. Now there's 8 directions here, which means the player can move the object in any one of the 8 directions, which is what we want, so let's click on that. Now the reason that maximum is 8 directions is because most controllers and the keyboard can only cope with 8 directions. So you've got the 4 cursor keys, up, down, left, right, but you can also click up and right, which makes upright. So there's 8 directions, but you can't go up, right. There's no way of doing that. So there's only 8 directions that most keyboards, of all keyboards, and most controllers can cope with, which is why it's only 8 directions. Not to say that you can't have more than 8 directions. If you have a joypad, you can program it to have more than 8 directions, depending on the configuration of the joypad. But again, that's an advanced topic. Okay, so that's 8 directions, but I don't want that paddle to be going any other directions rather than left and right. Okay, so I'm going to deselect all of them and just click on the left and right, because that's all the directions I want it to go. Okay, the initial direction doesn't matter, because the initial directions to say, well, which animation should it start at? And all of them are selected, so it just randomly picks one. Well, we only have one animation, the right hand one, so it's going to be right hand whatever it is. But you might want a player to be looking at the screen at the start and then start moving around and changing animations, but it's not relevant in this case. And you can see the speed, deceleration, acceleration is also there. So later on, maybe as the game goes on, it goes slower, or if the player gets a power up, it might be able to go faster, or something like that, which you can influence later on in the game. But I could try it and it might not work. So let's have a look. So try movement. It might be too slow. Looking at that, that's a reasonable speed. I'm quite happy with that. Looking at the deceleration, which is, so if I start over here, if I hold left and let go, you can see it took a little bit of time there to stop, and that's the deceleration. When I press right, it doesn't go straight away, it slowly accelerates, which is quite quick, but you can see it accelerating. If I change the acceleration to 10, and click on it and click try movement, then you can see I'm holding it down and it's taking forever to get started. So depending on the game you're trying to make, you want to play with these figures, and there's no mathematical equation for working out what the best figures are. The best way of doing it is just try a whole load out. Okay, so that's that done. Now there's nothing really else I can do as it is in the level editor. I need to create cause and reaction in a way that says if this thing happens, this thing should happen. And the way I'm going to do that is with the event editor, which you can go to at the top here. So this is the frame editor we're in. We go click event editor. Now this is quite a simple interface. It really is simple compared to having to program it differently. On the left here, you're going to say when this thing happens, and on the right here you're going to say do this. So let's start. So I'm going to right click or left click here, it doesn't matter which, and I'm going to select the object that it's relevant to. So I'm thinking the paddle at the bottom, and I'm going to right click that, and I'm going to say where are we, position, test position of paddle, and I'm going to say, I'm going to click the left hand one and click the right hand one. Now what this screen is it's saying compared to the frame position, where is the object. Now I'm going to say when the object is leaving the left hand side or leaving the right hand side, I want something to happen. Well, I want it to stop, so that's fine. The other ones, the different, obviously the top and bottom one mean leaving the top and leaving the bottom. The other ones mean when it enters it, so is it entering from the left or entering from the right or top or bottom. And this is just, is the object not on the screen. And sometimes you want to use this one to say, well, destroy it, it's using up memory, we don't want that. Okay, but the player one won't ever be off the screen, so they're not relevant to it. So click OK. So you can see here, as the paddle leaves the play area on the left or right. Now, if I ever wanted to change the thing I'm describing, the paddle, if I want the player to control something else, then what I can do is I can click that and I can change what that's talking about. And that's really useful for when you change your mind over something and you don't want to have to rewrite all of the code bits. Okay, so when it leaves the player on the left, the play area on the left or right, I want it to stop. So I right click that, movement, stop. Now I could have it bounce, but I don't want it to bounce, so I'll stop. So if I click run, application, and you can see the bouncy ball goes straight off. But if I click left, it doesn't let me go anymore. If I click right, it doesn't let me go anymore. And there's no way of me going off the screen. The last thing you want to happen is it go off the screen in this game, because you'll lose it and the player will get frustrated. Let's close that down. Next thing I want to do, and I could just click and drag this, double click this and say, right, the bouncy ball. But the problem is I want to add a little bit more to that. So I've got the bouncy ball leaving left or right, but the bouncy ball could go at the top or bottom. So what I can do is I can double click the action and it says, well, okay, do you want to edit it? And yeah, I do. I just want to add the top and bottom. So when the bouncy ball hits the top or bottom, it also stops. So it just updates it and says, well, it just leaves the play area, and that's exactly what I wanted. So I right click the bouncy ball, and I say movement. This time I don't want it just to stop, maybe I want it to bounce. Now with a bouncy ball it will bounce by default, so it doesn't really make much of a difference, it just gives it a bit of an extra kick maybe. So click bounce. So if I run application, and you see the bouncy balls bouncing. Now you could see there that it started to just go left to right. That would be the worst thing in our game, because the player will just be sitting there watching the ball bounce left to right and won't be able to influence it, and it would get very boring. So you can see the randomness makes it decide after a couple of bounces, right, let's change position anyway, let's change the direction. Okay, let's close that down. Now I want a collision between two objects. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say when the bouncing ball hits, so collision with another object, which in this case is my paddle, I want it to bounce. Now I've already put the bounce there, so I can just click and drag and it just copies it down. Saves me having to right click, movement and bounce. And I'm going to copy that, but instead of between the bouncy ball and the paddle, I'm going to double click paddle and I'm going to say the block. And I want it to bounce. So let's run that. And it's starting to look a lot more like a game, which is good. You can see there nothing happens if it hits the bottom. Okay. Now the whole point of the game is to get rid of the blocks, and it would be a bit boring if when the ball hit the block nothing happened. So what we're going to do is, not only is the ball going to bounce when it hits the block, right click here, and what I want it to do is destroy. So where are we? Right at the bottom, destroy. I must have clicked that over 1 billion times and I've just lost it. Excellent. So now it will destroy the block, so let's run application, and it's going to do that endless loop. But with the randomizer it will get out of it soon. There we are. And you can see here that it's starting to be a lot more of a game, but I should have lost then, but I didn't. Ah, fascinating. That's the problem with the randomizer, sometimes you get some really weird bounces off it. And there we go. Game over. Let's close that down. Okay. So we've got the basics of the game, but it was really annoying having the ball starting going left and right, and potentially I don't really want it to go down and make me lose straight away. So what I'm going to do is go back to the frame editor, click on the ball, and I'm going to change its initial direction. I'm not going to let it go down first of all, but I'm going to let it go an angle first of all, so that at least it starts off, and try and make them symmetrical, but that's just me. So when I start it now, it will always, and I can click this one here to start the game again, and this rewind button doesn't always reset the entire game, but mostly it does a good job. And you can see here every time it goes up, so it gives the player a chance to get their paddle in the right position. Something else I noticed is this ball is probably too big, so what I can do is I can actually change the size of it here. So if you click on size, so click on the ball, click on size, I can change it to maybe 30, which is actually quite small, but that's probably fine. Let's try it now, and actually that's probably quite a good size for it. Okay, close that down. Now what I want to do is the player loses if the ball hits the bottom, which is the whole point of the game. So I'm going to click and drag this one. I'm going to reuse this, but it's not left and right. I'm going to double click on it. No, that's just moronic. Sorry. Double click and drag this one. Double click it. And this time the player doesn't lose if it goes off left, right or up top. The player loses when it goes off at the bottom. So I'm just going to select the bottom one, and what I'm going to do is end the application. Now you might want to have a screen come up saying you lose, you might want to put lives in there. You also might want to put a screen at the start that doesn't start the game, doesn't make the ball bounce. until the player clicks OK or the player says they're ready to start. But for this series, we'll go into the sort of user interface elements at a later stage. So if I click Run Application, you can see I've lost straight away. There we are. Application. Oh. Application. No. Don't know why that's closing down. Anyway. Run application. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this and I'm going to restrict that from going upwards. So I'm going to only let it go up, and it gives the player at least a fighting chance. Right, there we are. Now the problem with that is it's not great actually. Let's click on that again. Let's only let it go these two. Let's see how that goes. There we are. And at least there's a bit of an angle on it then, so that it doesn't get into that repeated bouncing up and down. And this looks like a good game. There we are. Not the most interesting YouTube video now. Me just playing a bouncing ball game. There we are. Go on, go on, go on. There we go. And you want something to say, right, end the game. So I'm going to do a bit of conditional logic here. What I'm going to do is have a counter constantly count how many of the blocks there are, and when that count says 0, then I want a message to appear. So it's a little bit of advanced stuff, but we can cope with it. If I right click the little cogs here and compare two general values, now this lets me compare anything, and this is an incredibly powerful tool to use. What surprised me when I talked to some people about Clickteam Fusion is they very rarely use this or don't really know about it. I use it all the time, and there's not an application I've written that doesn't use this, because there's a lot of things that you want to compare that Clickteam Fusion hasn't thought you might want to compare, and this is where this comes in. So I'm going to right click on the block and I'm going to go to count number of objects, and that just returns how many objects there are. And I'm going to say equal. Now yes, I want equal to 0, but I get in the habit of always exaggerating, always saying, well, lower or equal. You can't get negative amounts of blocks, but if you get in the habit of exaggerating and not having just it equal to one thing, if you can have it equal to an infinite amount of things, it's always better. Where that comes into play is where you're saying, is the player in this position? And some people say, well, is the player in this position here? And that's never a good idea. It's always better to say, is the player in the position past this area? Again, we'll go into those topics later on, but always try and get in the habit, if you can, to say lower or equal, or greater or equal, rather than equal. Click OK. And for this one, if it equals 0, you'd be absolutely fine. Okay, and I want a message to appear, so I'm going to click on the frame editor, double click anywhere that's not got something already, and type in string. Now string is the most common text way of displaying text in your game, and I'm going to say you win, capital. So I've typed that into, and you type it in here, or you could type it in here. Either way would be fine. And what I'm going to do is go to the text options, and I'm just going to click on font. Now it's not just font that you can select here, you can select the size, which is what I'm after, and I want the size to be a lot bigger, and I want it in bold. And I'm not going to change the fonts for this tutorial. Now you might think, well, where's the text gone? It doesn't automatically resize, unfortunately, so you've got to do that yourself. I'm just going to resize the string object so that it's visible, and I want it outside the screen. I don't want it to display at the start because they haven't won at the start. Go back to event editor and say if it's 0, I want to destroy the bouncing ball, and I want to move the position of this. So select position, that grabs the string object and moves it from the top to where I say. So select position, and here I can just say where I want to select it. Now different objects, and again this is beyond this course, but different objects where you say you want them, the position of them might be different to what you think. I want the string right in the middle, so I might put this little cursor right in the middle, but actually I won't get it in the middle. If I scroll up and click on this, you can see that it's actually putting the action point, or the point at which that cursor applies to the top left of the string. So actually I want it somewhere around there. Okay, and again, mathematically you can work out the exact position to what you want. So I'm going to click OK, and that will create that. I also probably want to destroy the paddle as well, because I don't want them to keep going left and right endlessly. Okay, so run application, and again I've got to destroy all the blocks now. Hopefully I won't lose. That was close. And this is the endless loop here, which hopefully we won't get out of. There we are. And if that's happening a lot in your game, you might want to push the randomizer up so that it becomes more random. Oh no, I hate these. And there we go, and you win. Now you might want to put in something that says click to restart and things like that. I think that's going to be it for today. That's a lot longer than I thought it would be. Ways you can extend that is, I'm going to talk about loops in a later video, and you could create each of the blocks programmatically so you don't have to sit there and create them. It's also good for if you wanted multiple levels and you didn't want to sit there and do it for each level. You could just have the loops create them automatically. You might want a menu screen at the start. You might want to have a click to start option. You might want to have it so that it takes more than one hit, and if you assign variables to each object, so just numbers to each object, you could assign each of them 3 at the start, and then every time it hits it, it takes 1 away, and if any of them equal 0, equal to or lower than 0, it destroys the object. That's beyond what I really have time to go through today, but we'll talk about all of those things in a later video. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you've learned a little bit about Clickteam Fusion. I assume that most of the people watching this are beginners, so I hope that that's invigorated you to go on and make a lot more interesting games and applications. Little tutorials like this really helped me out at the start to just get my foot in the door, try and understand how the program works. And if you've got any applications or games that you've made using this tutorial, please let me know. If you like this video, please click on the liked button at the bottom of the video, and if you want to see more tutorials, then click on the subscribe. Thank you very much.